Hello, my name is Paul Dougherty, and I wanted to focus this particular assignment on local history. Uh, I live in Chester County, Pennsylvania. I've been here for better part of 30 years. We have a rich culture here, and chose to do my research on dealt with the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment that fought in the Civil War and had been enlisted and stood up uh, following the Emancipation Proclamation in the spring of 1863. The unit had quite a history. It was one of the first units to excel, if you want to use that term, in their combat role during the Civil War, from what is referred to as the U.S. colored troops, or black soldiers that that served in regiments of all black soldiers with all white officers. That was the model that they used throughout the war. If I'm not mistaken, 180,000 African Americans served in these regiments during the Civil War. Into the assignment that we have in this particular class. As I mentioned before, I reside here in Chester County. We have quite extensive facility in this county for archiving various documents, artifacts, things just much like every other county does. However, there seemed to be, and I haven't found out why yet, a huge emphasis on the U.S. colored troops. There is an enormous index of materials where they've identified literally almost every soldier from this county that was in one of the USCT regiments, including the 54th out of Massachusetts. Along with that, they have a very accurate and in depth burial index for veterans. So every veteran that's been buried here in Chester County from the beginning of the Civil War era all the way through the conflict in Vietnam, there is a card with massive amount of information on the card, including where grave markers are, what cemeteries are in, and where they're located within those cemeteries. While I was doing my research, and I looked into where some of these U.S. colored troops are being buried in Chester County once they returned, fulfilled their lives here in the county. Many of them lived well into the early 1900s. But the vast majority of them, with very little exception, uh, was buried in one of the local uh, African American cemeteries. The cemeteries around which these churches had been inaugurated in the early 1800s. A lot of that ties into the fact that the racial current in southern, particularly southeast Pennsylvania, including the Philadelphia area, during the Civil War, was frankly not as it was as you would expect uh, with an abolitionist viewpoint. There was a lot of animosity towards the black population in both Philadelphia and in the suburb areas in which I reside. That even carried on to the aspect of black troops trying to join regiments, uh, encountered many roadblocks by the local white population. I believe that, and I have some other research to support this, is the reason why over 40 soldiers, or those who are about to enlist in these USCT units, actually went to Boston area in the Reedville area, where Fort Meigs was stood up, and the 54th Massachusetts began its training. Nice. When I mention the 54th, you may be aware of the movie Glory, which chronicled some of the events of the unit standing up, training. There was a major issue in which they were only going to be paid $10 a month as opposed to the white soldiers that were getting $13 a month. The soldiers in the 54th are most famous for leading the assault on July 16th, 1863, on Battery or Fort Wagner, which was a Confederate fortification on the mainland, just shy of where Fort Sumter is outside of Charleston Harbor. Hello, today I'm standing on the site of what once was the Lindley Hill Cemetery and AME Church. The property was purchased in 1851, and the church was erected here, and of course the corresponding cemetery was laid here. We will take a short tour of this particular cemetery. It's an all-black cemetery. The church itself and the remains are here, burnt down in the early 1830s. But this particular plot of land is nestled within a residential area. There are literally homes all around this structure. It's about an acre of land that is here. This church was one of 40 AME churches or black churches within Chester County over the years. Unfortunately, this one remained basically untended. The church here at Lindley Hill burnt down, unfortunately, in the early 1930s. However, people were still continuing to be buried here all the way up into the 1960s. Unfortunately, again, at that time, the place began to become fairly dormant and overrun, and unless you knew what you were looking for, you would come across this area and not really recognize what it might be. The tombstones are relatively small, and if it's overgrown in a wooded area, it's not going to be very noticeable. As you can see behind me, there are a number of the graves, and you can see some of the veterans' graves are marked by the American flag and the corresponding stand that the Veterans Administration provides for each veteran. Before I begin a short tour of the cemetery, I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of projects that were done to reclaim this site, make it presentable and a really nice place to visit and to commemorate the people that lived here and died here and were buried here. Approximately 15 years ago, a journalist came out here, found the site, did a little bit of research, and then wrote a story about it. That brought it to the attention of a number of people in Chester County. I know I heard of it and thought it was kind of remarkable. From that time on, I was aware of it. Not long ago, I was asked to help out with an Eagle Scout project. And the young man that came out here came in and started to clean much of the brush and to basically make the grave sites presentable so that you could see where they were. There was another Eagle Scout project done in which the veterans' graves were marked, and the sign now that the Lindley Hill Cemetery is now marked as you drive by. It's very prominent, not near the road, and you can very easily see it. We're continuing our tour of the site. At this location, there are the remains of 14 soldiers that enlisted in USCT or U.S. Colored Troop regiments from here in Chester County about 1863, the first few months of 1863 after the Emancipation Proclamation. A number of soldiers joined these regiments, and as I pan around, you can see that many of the veteran graves are marked with our national colors. I am currently standing before the grave marker of a Private Josiah Cole. He was a member of Bravo Company, 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment. These are the folks that you might be familiar with from the movie Glory. There was more Pennsylvanians in that particular regiment than there were, in fact, people from Massachusetts or any other state. That particular regiment is what I'm doing my project on at the moment, and I was able to locate Josiah's grave here. He's one of the folks that I'm actually researching right now. There was another Eagle Scout project done in which the veterans' graves were marked, and the sign now that the Lindley Hill Cemetery is now marked as you drive by. It's very prominent, not near the road, and you can very easily see it. Undergrowth and whatnot are the graves of 9 USCT troops. Dougherty. I'm standing out here in a heavily wooded area near South Callan Road in East Fallowfield,
Chester County, Pennsylvania, not very far from Coatesville. Back in this area, overrun and cannot get to the graves and find them at this time, is a cemetery that includes 10 soldiers from the Civil War. It was an AME church on this ground, built in the early 1820s. It was long gone by the time of the Civil War. The people that had the land here ceded it over to the government. Back behind me is buried John Henson, who was in Charlie Company, the 54th Massachusetts, one of the gentlemen that I'm researching right now for my project. He is back in, he survived the war. He was at Fort Wagner and then returned home and spent the rest of his days here in Chester County. Also buried back in here behind me is the remains of Richard Adams. Richard Adams joined the 3rd USCT right here in eastern Pennsylvania. He was 63 years old. He survived the war and was mustered out at the end, but about the time he ended his service, he had severe rheumatism and a few other ailments that were really hampering his health. 15 years later, he was going into a poorhouse. He had no assets to maintain himself. 9 days in to this facility, he died. And, he's sort of a local hero here for managing to sign up and fight for his country at such an august age. This is one of the areas. This is, again, one of those 40 AME churches, cemeteries that are in Chester County, and many of them are overrun like this, and people that may, see this as a historical site not even recognize where it is.